Before I cue up this week's episode, I would love it if you would go over and subscribe to the Julie Gayheart YouTube channel. I see my YouTube channel as my podcast portfolio. Not only will you find Jester Section Hiker, but you will also find the additional shows I produce and edit, like the Appalachian Trail podcast and Stories That Inspire Us by Hiker Medals. You will also find the collaborative work I've done over the years with other creators, including the work that my business partner, Austin Wallace, and I do via Jester Wallace Productions. Thanks for all of your support, and if you like what is happening here on Jester Section Hiker, go check out everything on the Julie Gayheart YouTube channel. And now, on to the show. Welcome back to the Jester Section Hiker podcast, your premier podcast with the spotlight on section hikers, and I am your host, Julie Jester Gayheart. It's been several days since I have been back on the mic, and it feels good to be recording once again. The last time I recorded an episode was last week's episode with Mary and Mike in Pennsylvania. It was such an awesome day hiking that 5-mile stretch with Mary and Mike. Thank you all again so much for meeting me, hiking on that hike, and then we had a great lunch and great conversation. After that hike in Pennsylvania with Mary and Mike, we loaded up the van and we went to visit family in Ohio for a few days, and that was very, very relaxing. And my mom made me her homemade vegetable soup. We had that soup the very first night we got there, along with some good old Dolly Parton cornbread. My mom sure knows how to welcome me home. When we left Ohio, we had some days to spare, so we decided as we head south toward home in North Carolina, we would take some time and I would go back and hike the AT through the Shenandoahs southbound. I am standing here right now at Sawmill Gap Overlook, getting ready to head out and hike my last day here right in the park. I started my southbound trek on Friday, July 26th at US 522 and will finish today, Sunday, August 4th. I'll put my full southbound itinerary in the show notes of this episode, and if you're listening over on YouTube, they will be in the description. As I've been hiking southbound through the park, I've been really thinking about the history of the Shenandoahs and what has brought me here time and time again. So on my third day here in the park, I picked up a book from the Elk Wallow Wayside titled Shenandoah Secrets, The Story of the Park's Hidden Past by Carolyn and Jack Reeder, and the book is published by the Potomac Appalachian Trail Club. This book has all kinds of history about the park, landowners, the PATC, the CCC, and what drew me to the book the most was the title, Shenandoah Secrets. I have read this book almost twice since we've been in the park. It's that good. So I figured I would share with you all 3 stories from the book as I head toward the southern boundary marker at Rockfish Gap. Before we get to the book, here are some stats I found interesting and really myself have always wondered. So here we go. The AT crosses Skyline Drive 32 times. The park itself is actually over 200,000 acres of protected land. The total miles in Shenandoah National Park itself encompass somewhere around 500 miles. And the AT miles from park border, southern boundary, to the park border and the northern boundary, according to Far Out, is 103.9 miles. Here's another statistic that I found interesting as I was routing out the park. If you're hiking northbound, you ascend a total of 21,607.6 feet, and you descend a total of 21,353.3 feet. And of course, if you're going southbound, it would be the opposite. Another thing that I found very interesting is the park is maintained by the PATC. So I went over to the website and I wanted to read something that is on their homepage. The Potomac Appalachian Trail Club was founded on the principles of volunteerism and public service by outdoor enthusiasts in the mid-Atlantic region of the U.S. in 1927. The club was originally formed to survey and construct hundreds of miles of the Appalachian Trail, a 2,100-mile footpath following the crest of the Appalachian Mountain Range. 8 people, including Myron Avery, met and formed the PATC in Washington, D.C., to build a section of the AT and support the creation of the Shenandoah National Park. It is said that the dream of an Appalachian Trail belongs to Benton Mackay. The first PATC president, Myron Avery, helped to realize that dream, and the AT was completed as a continuous footpath from Maine to Georgia in 1937. By the time the Shenandoah National Park was created in 1937, the PATC was already maintaining a network of trails in the region and publishing the region's first maps and guidebooks. The PATC also started constructing cabins and shelters for its members and the hiking public during this period. PATC's trail region continues to grow along with more cabins and shelters, maps and guidebooks, while the values on which the club was founded, volunteerism and public service. If you want to find out more information about the PATC and all the trails they maintain and everything you can do, you can go over to www.patc.net. And I personally want to thank the PATC because I love the Shenandoah National Park and I love going through the AT here. So I'm going to go over and make a donation, and hopefully that small donation will help you all continue to maintain and do more things as the years go. So y'all, I am headed out to hit the trail this morning, but I'll be back for some storytelling from the book Shenandoah Secrets throughout the hike as I head toward that southern boundary marker and Rockfish Gap. So y'all, I'll be back soon. All right, y'all, I am back and I am just over a little, let's say a mile and a half or so into today's hike. And for reference, in the intro that I read that from Sawmill Run Overlook. And that is where I started, which is Appalachian Trail southbound mile marker 1,322.3. And today I will be ending my hike in the park at Rockfish Gap, and I am searching on Far Out right now. I'm going to give you that mileage. Rockfish Gap is mile marker 1,332.9, which makes it a 10.5 mile day. And again, that'll round out my southbound trek through the park. And I'm going to read you 3 stories, and I'm going to stop along the way, as I said earlier. And there are many, many, many stories in this book. And I highly recommend, again, if you're interested in some history in Shenandoah National Park, the name of this book is Shenandoah Secrets, the story of the park's hidden past. So I had to narrow it down. Again, there are many, many stories in this book. And the first one I want to read is from a very popular hike in the park, the AT. Going southbound, you have to actually climb this mountain. And then the area that I'm going to read about is just off of the Appalachian Trail. And it's an area or a mountain called Mary's Rock. And here is the history. Long ago, people called the mountain that flanks Thornton Gap the Great Pass Mountain. But that name is seldom heard today. Park visitors now speak of Mary's Rock, using the name given to the mountain's boulder-strewn summit. Many legends tell us of how Mary's Rock was named. In one, Francis Thornton, who owned much of the adjoining land, rode up the Great Pass Mountain with his bride, Mary Savage. From the boulder pile at the summit, Thornton showed Mary his expanse of land and presented it to her. According to this story, the mountain was called Mary's Rock because Mary Thornton was the first woman of European origin to climb it. In one other variation of this story, Thornton took his daughter, Mary, to the mountaintop to survey his land, and she fell in love with the view. In another, Mary Thornton climbed to the summit and returned carrying 2 bear cubs. In a different story, Mary was mountain girl who climbed to the mountain's rocky summit to watch for the return of her faithless lover. As she kept her vigil, there she was blown over the cliff by a gale and fell to her death. 2 different explanations of this name still circulate in nearby Rappahannock County, but both agree that the park was named after Thornton's daughter. One version tells us of Mary Thornton jumped to her death from the summit because she was in love with 2 men and couldn't decide between them. In another, Mary was crazy. She became lost when she was wandering alone on the mountain, fell off the rocks, and she was killed. Perhaps, though, Mary was actually Mary, Marye, and the rock outcrop was named for Peter Mary, builder of an early turnpike through Thornton Gap. This theory is rather prosaic compared to the various legends involving young women named Mary, but it's a compelling one. Whenever the origin of its name, Mary's Rock, has been a landmark on the skyline and a hiker's destination for generations. At one time, a spring near the mountaintop was a favorite place for local young men to propose to their sweethearts. If a girl accepted an invitation to go up the spring on Mary's Rock, it was understood that she would accept the proposal. If she didn't want to marry her suitor, she'd decline the invitation, and he'd be spared the embarrassment of rejection. That spring no longer flows, but some people think the blasting of the tunnel through the mountain permanently altered the water, and perhaps the water that sometimes drips over the tunnel's entrance or is captured there as an ice sculpture once bubbled to the surface and providing the setting for a romantic tradition. All right, y'all, there is several theories of how Mary's Rock was named. I am going to put this book away, put my readers back in my fanny pack. By the way, they're all fogged up. So if I tripped up on that reading, I do apologize. But anyway, I will be back shortly for another reading about Big Meadows. All right, y'all, I am back and I am standing at the rock pile at the peak of Calf Mountain. My foot is just beside the marker here in the rock. And I've got the book back out, Shenandoah Secrets, and I got the glasses on. They are already fogging up, but now I'm going to read to you about one of the most popular areas in the park, known as Big Meadows. Big Meadows is probably the best known area of Shenandoah National Park, a welcome expanse of open land in the midst of forested mountains. Old maps show that the meadow was once much larger. It extended from Fisher's Gap on the north to a mile south of Booton's Gap, and from Tanner's Ridge on the east nearly as far west as Hoover Camp. Today, the park keeps a fraction of the original area open by mowing. From earliest times, Big Meadows was considered prime grazing land. Records of Shenandoah Valley town meetings show interest in using it for summer pasture as early as 1732. When Big Meadows became parkland 2 centuries later, it belonged to a Shenandoah Valley family that had used it as summer cattle range since 1870. Mountain families lived on the land as tenants, looking after the cattle and extending the meadow by cutting timber for their own use. This mutually beneficial relationship between the valley landowners and their mountain tenants has been compared to the feudal system. From the windows of Big Meadows Visitor Center, you can often see deer browsing in the meadow. And depending on the season, you might see berry pickers, kite flyers, or cross-country skiers. In 1933, you would have seen what amounted to a small city inhabited by as many as 200 young men. Then, Big Meadows was the site of Camp Fechner, one of the first CCC camps. President Roosevelt visited the camp a few months after it was established and ate the noon meal with the enrollees from an aluminum mess kit out of doors. 3 years later, he came to Big Meadows again, this time for the park dedication. It was a well-planned event. Officials made Skyline Drive one-way south before the ceremony and one-way north afterward, and tank wagons along the drive sold gas and oil. 45 state troopers kept traffic moving and protected the president. The ceremony was broadcast over coast-to-coast radio hookups, still a novelty in those days. The official program was opened with music by the U.S. Marine Band, and President Roosevelt formally received Shenandoah into the national parks system as a gift of Virginia. He dedicated it to all Americans, for the recreation and for the recreation which we find here. All right, you guys, I am headed down to Little Calf, and then by the time I get down to the next gap, I'll be about 5 miles in. And once I get about 2 or 3 miles shy of meeting Rockfish Gap, the next story I am going to read you, and it is my favorite, about a hidden secret at Rockfish Gap. I'll be back soon. All right, y'all, I have made it down to McCormick Gap, and I've got 3.8 miles to go until I cross the southern border of the Shenandoah National Park, the boundary marker, and then on to Rockfish Gap. And that will conclude the southbound trek through the Appalachian Trail in Shenandoah National Park. And I saved this story for last. The title of it is Rockfish Gap, and that is where I'm going to end the hike today, and this is my favorite one. So here we go. Far beneath Skyline Drive in Rockfish Gap lies an engineering marvel, the Blue Ridge Tunnel. In 1850, Irish workers with hand drills, picks, and black powder began drilling through the mountain. Following the design of a French engineer, Claude Crozet, they progressed through the mountain at the rate of 2 feet a day. The project was a joint venture relying on both public funds and private enterprise. The railroad company was to lay track on both sides of the mountain while the state did the stretch that included the tunnel. Groups of workers drilled from both ends toward the middle, and when they met, they were only half an inch off true center. This feat resolved years of speculation and wagers about the possibility of such precise planning. Plagued by construction problems, strikes, a cholera epidemic, and financial difficulties, the builders took 8 years to complete the 1,273-foot-long brick-lined tunnel. But the railroad company, eager to reap the profits of a trans-mountain route, hadn't waited for the state to finish it. After the company completed its stretches of track on both sides of the mountain, it built a temporary track through Rockfish Gap. Workers laying track had to contend with stubborn rock and build trestles across 6 deep ravines. But only 7 months elapsed between the start of the project and the first train. Grades were steep and curves were sharp on this temporary track. There was barely room for an engine for an ordinary train to stand on the summit before the slopes off, descending both toward the east and west. 3 special engines with 6 closely spaced 42-inch diameter wheels were built for this track. These engines could pull 4 fully loaded freight cars or a baggage car and 2 passenger cars. Each passenger run used a man at the brake on every platform who never leaves his post. Safety regulations limited the speed to 7.5 miles an hour on the ascent and no more than 4 miles per hour on the descent. The railroad used the temporary track at Rockfish Gap from 1854 until Crozzet's Tunnel was opened about 4 years later. This tunnel linked the valley with eastern Virginia for nearly a century before it was placed by one of the greater vertical clearance for larger locomotives. This new Blue Ridge Tunnel has carried the railroad under the southern end of Skyline Drive since 1943. Above ground, traffic crosses the Blue Ridge on I-64 and US 250. These are the last of a series of roads that have passed through Rockfish Gap since sometime in the second half of the 18th century. The original rolling road was gradually improved, and around 1808 it was incorporated into a turnpike running from Staunton to the James River. The turnpike was made by cutting a depth of 3 or 4 feet into the side of the mountain and throwing the earth so as to produce a level. In the 1830s, a stagecoach passenger described the Rockfish Gap section in some places to the inexperienced. It was an awfully dangerous appearance, running up the side of that steep mountain having no parapet walls. What a contrast to today's mountain crossing. Between the end of Skyline Drive and the beginning of the Blue Ridge Parkway, Rockfish Gap now sports a modern highway interchange and an island of commercial development. Few people know of the abandoned tunnel with its brick-sealed entrances lying far below. But Claude Crozet's masterpiece, now a National Historic Civil Engineering Landmark, is the largest and best preserved artifact in the park. It's the least accessible too. So y'all, I am off 3.8 miles south, and I will be to Rockfish Gap. And guess what? I am going to be looking for that large and best preserved artifact in the park. I doubt I'll find it, but why not take a look? I'll be back. All right, y'all. Hopefully you can hear that. I am standing at the southern boundary marker of the Shenandoah National Park, which means we have completed the park again, but this time going south on the Appalachian Trail. I've got about 0.3 to get down to Rockfish Gap. And I just wanted to say thanks for listening to this episode. Thank you for listening to all the section hiking that I was able to do this summer. I'd never want to take for granted all of you out there that listen to the podcast, that send me messages. I am truly thankful and grateful. And I wanted to end with this message that seems so fitting that it came on the day that I finished the park. So once again, I started Friday, July 26th, and I am finishing today, Sunday, August 4th, 2024, and the post from the Shenandoah National Park Service says, celebrate the Great American Outdoors Act anniversary with a free fee day today. The Great American Outdoors Act, the GAOA, is funding over $6 billion in maintenance and repair projects in national parks throughout the country. Today, August 4th, 2024, all National Park Service entrance fees will be waived to celebrate the 4-year anniversary of the historic legislation, one of 6 entrance fee-free days in 2024. And then it ends with giving the website for more information about the Great American Outdoors Act. So with that being said, as always, everybody, as I hike down to Rockfish Gap to get picked up, thanks for listening. Be safe out there and happy section hiking.